Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back for video game news for Friday, October 25th, 2024. And today I'm going to leave it as far as any possible network problems. If it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Not really sure what was causing the problems, and it might have been a factor of just my video card driver being buggy, and although why that would cause network problems seems to be weird. Nope, it just doesn't seem like. No, I'm still having network problems. Whatever, we're gonna go. I'm kind of squeezed with time anyways, and so instead of rambling at the front here, I'm gonna try and just jump directly into actual video game news, which is what I should have always been doing. Also, I really haven't done too much. I finished playing Punch Club, not a game I can particularly recommend, and then I jumped into playing one episode of Torchlight 2, which the hope there is that Torchlight 2 might be easy enough to take breaks from. There are very few games, though, where you're going to have a great experience if you play an hour of it and then 3 days later come back and play some more. And that is certainly the bane of every single kid, I imagine, these days with screen time, or with rules that only let them play video games on the weekend. And certainly that probably is why there has been such a embracing of the no story games, style of games, such as Minecraft and Fortnite, in that you just don't need to remember any kind of storyline or elements there. You just have to remember how to play, and then you can play a few games in an hour and then come back a week later and play some more games. And certainly we get that reflected on the 24-hour concurrent player list here from SteamDB, and that the number one is always Counter-Strike 2, and the vast majority of the top 10 games are games that are just pick up and playable. GTA 5 with GTA Online, I imagine, being included in that, is pick up and playable because the story just doesn't really matter as much. And then you have some standouts where the story might matter a little bit more, but most of these don't. And yeah, I guess I don't have anything else to really say as far as catch up anyways. Worked on my macro a little bit. It still needs some work as far as opening all of these news stories. And yeah, I'm just generally squeezed with other obligations that are not YouTube connected. There is this desire to rethink how I should schedule videos. Like, inherently, if I'm not scheduling videos at all right now, which is what I'm doing, it might just make some sense to have one series air every weekday instead of and just letting it go forever. Like, so a 30 episode series, which is about average. Here's my chart as far as a longer term look at what is the most relevant games, slightly longer term nowadays with the samples that I have. But yeah, if I had an average 30-day series, you're talking then 6 weeks about that would be the only game as far as pre-recorded footage airing on my channel, which is not really what I want my channel to do, and it would mean you'd have to wait 6 weeks before there was a different pre-recorded game being shown. That would certainly be in line with the amount of content that I might be able to make in this medium emergency that continues to go on. Has just severely reduced it. It's kind of funny, you have like the Fear collection, which I guess might still be a little relevant, on sale, I assume, for Halloween, but we're really close to Halloween. And you're not seeing a lot of other horror games on sale, as much as you just see random games on sale. And yeah, the Steam storefront does not ever really engage in a Halloween specific sale because horror games sell pretty well year round, and there's a lot of them and not a ton of them that are amazingly good. There is also just a high percentage of people who would be willing to play games but are not willing to play horror games, in the same way that there's a large percentage of people who watch movies but are not willing to watch horror movies. I did see that there was yet another visual novel, a all-ages version of a visual novel, so it's already been censored, that is running into what most people assume is a rogue employee, although I don't know how rogue he really is, or she really is, in Valve. And so they are running into approval problems as far as getting this visual novel from the 1990s that is a spin-off of a very popular visual novel that's already on Steam and has had a whole anime on it. Particularly when this is the all-ages version that's been censored already. And the main thing I want to point out with that is that censored gaming as a YouTuber has pretty much disappeared at this point. I imagine more troubles, personal troubles, have hit him, and I can certainly relate to that, but yeah, it is a shame because there have been stories that he should have caught, or he should have been able to make some kind of content in the past month or so. It feels like he hasn't put out much of anything. On that aspect, censored gaming is one of the few people I still follow on Twitter. I did log into my Blue Sky account that I made just to lock down the username, and nope, it is not at a point where, I just wanted to see the price here, it is not at a point where Blue Sky really is replacing Twitter for what I use Twitter for. And inherently, I would say I'm not too unique in there, in that the number one reason I have a Twitter account at this point is to publicly yell at YouTube when they randomly delete my account or put a random strike on it that is completely unfair. They only respond through Twitter, as far as I've heard, and I'm sure YouTube is intentionally not jumping onto the newest of social platforms just so that they can try and force more content creators to go through their own internal system, so then they can ignore complaints in a silent, non-public way, which is not helpful to content creators who really can only save their channels in many cases. And I can personally attest to that. My channel's been saved several times by publicly shaming them on Twitter. And so that is like the 95 to 99% reason that I'm still using Twitter. But then there is just a lot of other sources that are just not on Blue Sky. And yeah, in a lot of ways they may be falling back to just a Facebook And so at some point there is an argument that maybe I should fall to the old school and see if I can make a Facebook follow page that would make some sense. But the Facebook algorithm is so intensive and so full of ads, it's ridiculous. So I don't think I'd have a good experience there. So yeah, how that relates to gaming certainly is when you have like the National Video Game Museum in Frisco, Texas. It doesn't have a blue sky, and I get almost any news they put out, which they put out very rare amounts of news, or news very rarely. So I wouldn't really want to just directly lose all communication because I'm not looking at Twitter for them. A lot of game developers I was following on Twitter at some point, but a lot of them I also just muted because if they're not putting out a press release, it doesn't really matter what they're saying. I have covered Fear 1 and Fear 2 on my channel, so if I was in the right scheduling and had the time, I should have covered Fear 3 this year. Some of these DLC stuff. So some of these Warner Brother products, although on the other hand, you could almost assume that these Warner Brother products are actually on sale more because they're just desperate for cash, and Warner Brother Games in particular, now owned by AT&T, is I think struggling. Although in some ways TT Games rebundling and putting out a remastered version of Lego Harry Potter and a remastered version or a completely remade version of Lego Star Wars. But the Lego Star Wars was really ambitious to make a full-on remake and start all over, where this is very unambitious to just rebundle and remaster the graphics. Moving on, that'll bring us to the Video Games Chronicle news. So let's go through the headlines. We don't care about their podcast. That's actually something I can work on to make sure that those tabs get closed automatically. But yeah, it does suck that Video Games Chronicle is just promoting their own podcast as if that is actual news. Let's see. Alan Wake 2's DLC seems to tease Remedy's next game. Remedy currently has several announced projects in development. Romero Games has added further worker benefits as the studio celebrates 10 years. The studio added menopause leave and clothing allowance in the past year. This is a extremely different story than what we usually get as far as announcements go. The whole menopause leave, which is not something you get to talk about much in video game news, is a interesting thought, certainly. It is probably not the right way to phrase it. First of all, because it's gendered to focus only on women who could be menstruating, and it gets into just a lot of questions when you phrase it that way, in that, oh, is this lady too old? Has this lady had a hysterectomy? Is this lady premenopausal? I mean, premenstruating, prepubescent, with some of the child labor laws these days. We may very well get into that question even. Whereas, in general, I think it's probably better just to have 3 to 5 days, which is arguably when I've heard menopause is the worst, is for 3 or 5 days. It may go longer. 3 to 5 days of just personal leave that you can take at any time without prearranging things, you do it that way, you give it both to male, female, and non-binary people, so everybody, then it's much more equitable and fair at that point, and it just doesn't have the ickiness, for lack of a better term, of having menopause or menstruating being mentioned. But actually this says menopause, which, yeah, same thing though. Really, getting into actual medical things doesn't matter. Just having 3 to 5 days a month that you can take off is a great benefit, but it's also a very high benefit too, if people are actually needed to actually work. Most jobs, particularly game development, they aren't really needed. Like, if you really squashed it down, a month's worth of work probably is done in just about 10 days of 8-hour shifts. A clothing allowance makes a lot of sense, although it inherently tends to create a demand that people are dressed nicer than they may want to, or dressed in some certain way that they wouldn't want to be dressed. And yeah, but like, I can say certainly for video game developers, they tend to be very dressed down even when you're doing group photos and such, and so giving them a clothing allowance might be helpful to just push them in a right direction to dress the same way they would have to dress if they were working in a programming job somewhere else. This is the kind of benefits you can get from the co-creator of Doom, in that he just has a lot of success behind him, and is definitely trying to run something different. Romero Games is also based in Ireland, so things are certainly, I imagine, done different in Ireland than they would be done in China or India or the United States, where those kinds of benefits are not only not expected but almost impossible to competitively add. I'm actually a little confused here, because I thought it was menstruation leave, but menopause leave is probably just the same thing as menstruation leave, but for people who are menopausal. It's probably the same amount of time, and you can just take it off for any reason, which gets back to my original thought of just calling it personal days. Just no questions asked. Personal days sounds a lot better. But then again, they may already be giving personal days and stacking even more days off. It is also, I guess, worth pointing out as a video game consumer, though, I don't know if Romero Games is really making any games right now, or has announced anything. Yeah, so this treating the employees better is nice and all, but it doesn't actually relate to anything. One of the tweaks I had to do was to get the bottoms of some of these stories to be blue instead of going to white, is that it just pushes the bottom of the story all the way here, so I can now scroll all the way to a blank screen if I want to, which isn't really that big of a deal, and I'm still trying to kind of tweak the size of these so that the text is not being shown and that the pictures are bigger if I can make the pictures bigger. A Baldur's Gate 3 exec says Ubisoft is to blame for Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown selling poorly. The hardest thing is to make a 85 plus game. It's much more easier to release one. That's a weird phrase that I don't fully understand. I guess what they're generally saying is that the requirements and the desire by Ubisoft for the game to be super successful is harder because it was developed by an internal first-party studio instead of Ubisoft just being a publisher and publishing some other game that had already been made. Although, in the game industry, I don't think it is ever really the case that a publisher swoops in after a game has been fully created and then just becomes the publisher. It's always the case that the publisher has to accept the pitch for a game and then fund the development of that game completely. Perhaps there is a little bit more of an easy experience if the publisher is just not hovering over your shoulder as a game developer, if you're a second party developer versus a first party developer being in the same office as the publishing department and potentially getting a lot of micromanagement from that. But we really haven't heard a lot of stories like that. Inherently, I would say it just feels like the desire was too high. When you have a character like the protagonist of The Lost Crown, and then you call it a Prince of Persia game, and it just doesn't look like a Prince of Persia game on that first trailer, you're just losing a lot of hype from day one. It would have been better if the at least few first trailer showed a character that looked like the Prince of Persia, and then maybe did a bait and switch at the end of the trailer and said, well, there's a character that looks like the Prince of Persia that you're going to see, and then, surprise, here's this new character coming to save him, which I think is exactly the story of the game. But if that is the case, I don't think they ever showed who the actual Prince of Persia is in The Lost Crown. Which, yeah, this could have been a generational shift type game to say this is going to be the new Prince of Persia, but the old Prince of Persia is now very old and retiring as a prince or as a king. Or yeah, I guess it's only worth it to move on. We don't want to spend too much time. The Thing Remastered gameplay trailer teaser at night shows Night Dive's upgrade in action. So I honestly don't remember a game called The Thing. It very possibly was a game that was just in that 90s era. At some level, you could make a horror game like Dead Space and not have to license The Thing. But then also, The Thing might have been somewhat popular when this game came out. The Thing remake, the first remake of The Thing, or that actually might be the second remake of The Thing. Since then, we've had a whole nother Thing prequel remake movie that's not really relevant. So, inherently, what I assume is the case here is that Universal Pictures realized that they have the rights to The Thing and wanted to make some more money, so we are now at a point where Night Dive seems to be capable of converting old games and remastering them. I think a lot of this also comes down to the fact that I think a lot of these games ran on just about the same engines, so making a remaster that runs one game potentially allows you to remaster other games. Atari being involved, the new Atari probably made that easier too. Yeah, this was a not early 90s but 2002 PlayStation 2, Xbox, and PC game. I probably was just not that deep into gaming. I never had a PlayStation 2 or an Xbox or a PC during that time. I would have been playing probably Wii games, if anything. So that one certainly just passed me by. But then there is very much a question as far as is it relevant now? Is it worth really trying to make a Thing game or play a Thing game? It almost would feel like the thing, a video game based on the thing, would have to have the thing succeed at the end of the movie, which maybe he did, maybe he didn't, and then take over larger areas with more people, so there's just more enemies to shoot. The Tales of Kinzera Zal developer is making an Afro-Gothic RPG inspired by Planescape Torment. Right now they're looking for a funding partner for Project Uso. Now, we had already seen a story that Zhao, or maybe it's pronounced Z-A-U, Z-A-U, or Z-A-U, has told its employees that they're at risk of being laid off as redundant because they're running out of money. So you would think it's almost contradictory for them to put out a story now that they're making a new game. But inherently, as a second-party developer, they're announcing and pitching a new game right now to get a publisher to fund them to make this game, and in that funding to keep the employees employed and getting paid. So this really is the way that a development company that is going to be a second-party development company finds funding. There's really little other things they could do. You would think that you could potentially just go to a bank and get a business loan, but honestly, I don't think banks around the world understand the concept of giving a business loan to develop video games. In the same way that I don't think a bank would give a loan to an artist to paint a painting or a author to write a book. And while that is inherently what banks should be doing, they want the easy, safe loans. They want to give loans for houses and cars, things that are almost completely going to be real property, in the sense that they can take a they can foreclose on a house or foreclose on a car and take that house away. If they give loans that are going to payroll, which I'm sure they generally just hate to do that, then the money is getting shifted into the pockets of employees, and they're just never going to be able to recover that. I don't think it's legal or has ever succeeded. The bank has sued employees of a company that's gone bankrupt for payroll money. And that's not just video games, though. That's actually authors and a lot of artistic things. It's why the music industry is also particularly so bad, is that you have these music publishing companies funding the development of songs and paying themselves a lot of money and charging the artists creating music a lot on the back end that they're not aware of. Alright, moving on. EA Sports College Football 25 is the best-selling American football game ever by the US dollar sales. It's also the second best esports game ever in the United States. Interesting. I do have a feeling that in the United States, NFL is losing some of its luster, particularly, I imagine, for the hardcore NFL fans of the past. There's been a lot of dissatisfaction, I think, in general over decades with the NFL in the real world, NFL games and rulings and rule changes and things like that. But then also a lot of the older, more conservative NFL fans, which makes up, I think, a large amount of NFL fans, have been turned away either because they are now more actively focused on something else. I think a lot of times that will be politics, as people have become more obsessed with politics, and that fandom has. And then they've been turned away from, like, Taylor Swift showing up at NFL things, or the Black Lives Matter kneeling thing. I know made a lot, or it seemed to make a large percentage of football fans fairly upset too. So NFL, I can't imagine, is very much dying. On a bigger aspect, NFL is probably losing a lot of fandom too, in that I don't think there's really a good way to stream NFL football games in one place in a good way. I know Amazon Prime has Thursday Night Football, but a lot of the football games from the NFL, I think, are still on cable or satellite TV, and that audience is shrinking, certainly, as the price continuously goes up on those subscription things, and as older people die out, and the older people are the only people really watching cable and satellite TV, or over-the-air TV, in any way, traditional TV. Of course, a lot of those reasons, which I was thinking about this just a few days ago, so that's why I have more to say about it. Otherwise, I wouldn't have had anything to say about it. A lot of those things, though, just don't really touch as much on college football, but I imagine college football does attract slightly younger audience, less controversies around college football in general. So maybe as NFL loses some fandoms, there is a lot of people going to college football. There is also, I think, a lot of money being shifted into college football, as I think they did finally change the rules to make it so that the college football players could actually do endorsements and get paid, instead of the college football associations just taking all the money, or the schools taking all the money, which that's been kind of a problem for a long time. Of course, it also creates this moneyed interest that could create new problems. The PC version of Croc Remaster is exclusive to Good Old Games. It will come with the original version. The remaster also includes a digital museum with behind-the-scenes material. I wonder if it's exclusive to Good Old Games because Good Old Games paid something for that exclusivity and for the development of it, or if it is just a thing where such an old game like this inherently would take more work than they're willing to spend to integrate any kind of Steam DRM. Although you can put, from what I hear, non-DRM games on Steam, so I do think you can probably just put any executable, as long as it's not a virus or anything, on Steam, and just say, take it. We're not integrating any of the Steam APIs at all. We're not doing Steam DRM. And this game doesn't actually look that terrible, that old. Now, personally, I'm not even interested in sitting through this whole trailer. I don't think the Croc series went anywhere. I remember it. It definitely felt like it was kind of an also-ran style 3D platforming game back in the day, back after Mario 64 type experiences. But yeah, I just don't think it went anywhere. Arguably, maybe it should have gone somewhere. Croc would have been another kind of character that could have been on the PlayStation or the Xbox. And I definitely remember when I was playing Xbox 360 and when I was looking at the PlayStation 3, it was fairly shocking that there was just not a lot of effort being spent to have any kind of kid-friendly games or mascot games on Xbox or PlayStation's lineup, and clearly you could have done that. Yoko Replay is coming to the PS5, Xbox Series X, and Nintendo platforms, is the quote here, which I guess is a way of saying the Switch 2 without saying the Switch 2, or you say platforms with an S and you're implying it will be the Switch 1 and the Switch 2. Yoka Replay, I think, is the first game remastered. Another kid-friendly platformer, much more modern one, though. Analysts are suggesting that Black Ops 6 could lead to between 2.5 and 4 million new Game Pass subscribers, but it could result in sales or down stories, says one analyst, which is, I guess, them saying basically anything can happen. I think we are really at a point here where any kind of hype or even relevancy talking around the Call of Duty series is starting to dry up almost completely. It'll still be around for a long time, but I don't think you're going to get a new audience playing Call of Duty or Black Ops or any of that. And yeah, it's just a very old, long in the tooth series. They are past a point where they should have put out a new game series under a new title and try to evolve or have a different tentpole to follow up the Call of Duty series enough that they could put it to bed for a while and let people develop a longing for Call of Duty. PlayStation Stars is no longer going to give credit for money spent on subscriptions. Points now only last for just over a year. I don't even remember a program called PlayStation Stars. But as a service, it's getting worse, so it's hard to even feel like that's a relevant story when I don't know how many people even know PlayStation Stars existed. Microsoft, I guess, also has a similar type of program, and it's not particularly worth doing either. None of these get cashback rebate programs are worth really doing. Amazon's live action series Like a Dragon Yakuza starts today. The first 3 episodes of the Sega adaptation arrive today. Oh, speaking of Call of Duty, I believe the most recent Call of Duty Black Ops 6 has been banned in, I want to say Kuwait or Saudi Arabia or some country. I think the thing is that Saddam Hussein, this is a speculation, is depicted in Black Ops 6, if that's even a game. I don't have this article open, so I'm really guessing at the facts being right here, so don't take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. But the speculation is that in one of those Middle Eastern countries, probably the country that Saddam Hussein once ruled, there's likely a censorship rule that you can't depict Saddam Hussein at all, and so it's getting banned, which, yeah, erasing history is not really going to help people learn from it, but also I wouldn't say video games are a true or accurate historical depiction. In the same way, I think you also have a situation where depicting Hitler in a non-historic way probably would run into some ire in Germany. But there's been several movies and stories that would have been censored under that kind of rule. It shouldn't be censored. Some kind of famous ones in particular, like even Charlie Chaplin's The Great Dictator would be a classic movie that has that classic speech at the end, and that movie potentially being censored in modern times because it depicts Hitler really would not make any sense. And it would have been severely, if it was censored and not shown to people when it first came out, then I'm not sure that the United States wouldn't have sided with Germany for a lot longer than a large portion of citizens in the United States did, not knowing the atrocities of the concentration camps from the outside looking in. A lot of people were part of a American United States Nazi party, or loose supporters of it at least. So things like the movie The Great Dictator certainly helped sway people's opinions. And that's the whole thing about censorship, and why it's bad is that the censorship is not the cure for bad speech or hateful speech or evil speech. More speech is the cure for bad, hateful, evil speech, and censorship does not accomplish that. Of course, I am not unrealistic, and I don't believe that a lot of these Middle Eastern countries and a lot of countries around the world in general believe in free speech at all, which none of that has really anything to do with Yakuza. Although there are, I imagine, some censorship things that are going to probably show up in this Yakuza Like a Dragon show too, or at least propaganda. Moving on, players are streaming the Nintendo Switch Online playtest despite requests not to clip the project. I guess it's despite requests not to, new line clips of the project are also being shared on social media. I haven't heard anybody really say anything as far as the visuals, though, of this MMO game test, which is what the leaks seem to be implying it is. So whatever the final product here is going to be, I imagine it's going to look very different. And I really haven't heard anybody say anything particularly interesting around the gameplay mechanics. So they're doing a playtest, and almost certainly this is a playtest just to test their servers. And yet, because of that, they're not really showing the final product, and they're not, in me at least, building up any real hope or thought that this game is going to be amazing. There are still a lot of people, a lot of parents, who, very possibly rightfully so, are concerned about their kids being on the internet at all. Like, there's usually some cracks in that concern. Usually having a phone that can get emails is considered okay, but going on a browser, even if it's a kid-friendly censored safe search type internet connection, is too much for parents, particularly in that transition parent point where they go from having no internet access to having some. That's a very large leap usually. So I'm sure Nintendo is kind of aware of that, and I wouldn't be surprised if a large percentage of Switch users are kids that just wouldn't be allowed to play even a Nintendo MMO. There is also certainly a lot of concerns around the mechanics in MMO type games being designed to keep players playing for way too long, encouraging addictive like behavior, or just overplaying, overuse like behavior. And then parents, I imagine, are concerned about that too. Nintendo does need to go into the online world, but they really don't need to go into an MMO world. They just need to have some kind of basic, very safe API as far as who can you be friends with, can your parents control and see who you're communicating with, can you matchmake. A lot of games could just be random matchmaking, but you can't text or video chat or audio chat with them at all, and that works for a lot of games, frankly, and it's fairly safe, so you don't have to then curate message logs or anything like that. You can just say, here's your group of friends, and you can play with your friends, but you can't ever communicate with them. And if that was a blanket rule as far as Nintendo's infrastructure, is that you're never going to be able to talk to people. You can talk to them at school later or some other way. That would work for Nintendo, I think, fairly well. Most games that do have voice chat, very few games have video chat, but most games that have voice chat or text chat, that just becomes a cesspool of unwanted negative comments anyways. So pretty much all game developers should be making their game to avoid communication. Of course, that hurts if you're playing like a MOBA and you're actually trying to coordinate and play together as a team, but you just make those people get on a phone call or a Skype call. Make them pull out a second screen and communicate that way. Or through, I don't even know what, I want to say Discord, but I'm not sure if that's really the app I'm even thinking of. But yeah, just make that a separate, you need a separate cell phone for those kinds of communications and coordinations. And yeah, nothing really more to say about that story. Kids or streamers are definitely going to try and get those clicks and views by leaking Nintendo information. In fairness, I probably would do the same. If I had gotten into the good graces somehow of Nintendo, I would know that Nintendo's going to try and screw me and strike me down at some point. So I would probably feel like it would be justifiable to screw them first, put out a leak if it's big enough to get me a few million views and a few thousand subscribers, and just hope that Nintendo takes down or strikes that video, and then you come back stronger from that strike with a lot more viewers and subscribers than you ever would have had before. Although I'm not 100% sure that if a video gets a copyright strike, you don't lose on YouTube all of those views or even all of those subscribers. Honestly, if YouTube did that, that actually would probably work a lot better. That if somebody copyright strikes you, you also lose all the subscribers you got from people watching that one video, then clicking the subscribe button, and all the views for that video, assuming you don't fight the strike. Of course, that would just also force a lot more people to fight the strikes, which nobody can afford to do. Moving on, Roblox is changing how preteens access the platform following reports of child endangerment. New account controls will give parents more insight into what their children play. Roblox says this every time. It seems pretty obvious Roblox is either incapable or unwilling to implement something that would be satisfactory to at least the mainstream video game media, who keeps on reporting these same stories, or the people at least making these reports. And Roblox almost certainly is the low-hanging fruit of a bad place for kids to be, even though it's targeted towards kids. Ubisoft has also said that they're in an exploration phase on the Rayman brand. Company issues a statement following report that a Rayman remake is in development. I imagine Ubisoft is in a lot of exploration phases right now, as it's just struggling to find a direction as a company, and I imagine the CEO is mostly just struggling to take the company private or get rid of activist investors who are trying to do a hostile takeover of the company. And I'm uncertain as to whether I'm on the side of Tencent and the CEO, Yves Guillemot, I think is his name, taking the company private, or if I'm on the side of the activist investors who would want to have somebody else put in charge so that Ubisoft makes more money. Although inherently making more money won't make better games. So I'm probably on the side of going private. Fewer investors means fewer greed overall. So even if it is a private company just run by 3 or 4 investors, that's probably better than a public company that's being run by hundreds, if not thousands, of investors, shareholders. I never got into the Rayman series either. And there's several different series that, on the face of them, feel relevant enough that I would want to play them. But I just haven't gotten around to it. Moving on to the Gematsu articles, we have quite a few Gematsu articles, and I suspect what's going to happen here is that we're going to find about half of them are old news. Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 3, and Resident Evil 7 have physical editions announced for the PS5. Zenless Zone Zero version 1.3 update, Virtual Revenge, launches November 6th. Night to Meet You, Obake no Mare, to Iyashi no Hitoiki for the Switch and PC, launches December 12th. That was a mouthful, and I think I pronounced half of that right. I assume this is yet another visual novel. Now, it is questionable whether I even need the curate features from Gematsu links, because if this is the case, there is no Steam link right now. If there is a case that this actually comes to Steam, then it probably is not going to. There are still people who see this kawaii moe art styles. I'd say this is more kawaii than moe, and have a problem with it. They have a problem with the poses and camera angles. They have a problem with a anatomically incorrect big-headed character having large breasts, although they also often have the exact opposite problem of an anatomically incorrect big-headed character having small breasts. So it's a lose-lose scenario. There are just people that hate the anime art style, particularly if it's depicting an anime girl. There are even people in that group that will hate anything that is more female-centric, but love the difference. You'll get maybe one bathing scene every 4 or 5 hours worth of gameplay in an uncensored version. Moving on, Kaleidoscope of Phantom Prison 2 has been announced for the PS4 and Switch. This is a girls' mental suspense series sequel planned, written by Ryukishi 07. I do think that there is still a fairly large split between the fandom. This is seeming to lean into bondage imagery. Also, but it honestly does seem like there are teenage girls that read manga and play visual novels and play video games in Japan, where I think in the United States in particular, it still feels a little slow for it to be acceptable for girls, teenage girls, preteen girls, to play video games or read manga, or read comics. You know, there's just been a lot of sexist mentality that has stayed very strong, where girls are just encouraged to do what are considered girls things and boys are encouraged to do boy things, and the two things are kept very separate and are very different without even intentionally doing it in a lot of cases, and thus this old ways of thinking just continue to get repeated over and over again, particularly when it's like a kindergarten teacher or an elementary teacher doing it, when kids are actually impressionable enough to listen to teachers. And that's definitely where it gets to. It's going to be a long time and a long struggle before we could finally put to bed in the United States the idea that there aren't really girls things or boys things, and that little kids in particular should be allowed to do whatever they want to do without fear of ostracization or judgment. We have to probably fight through a lot of that, and more visual novels in general should be more available. The Steam Deck could be a big player in that. I could see if Steam Decks were a little bit cheaper, or a lot bit cheaper, about half the price, it'd make a lot of sense to say, here's a bunch of visual novels that are really targeting girls. Why don't you play this on the Steam Deck? And girls in particular probably will engage with visual novels more because their reading abilities tend to be a little bit higher, and their attention span tends to be a little bit higher. That's always been the case. Girls tend to read more visual romance novels too in the West. Yeah. Kind of in contrast, I have no idea where a lot of these horror games get their fandom from. Yeah. This does feel like more of a horror game with actual gameplay content than what you normally would expect. In a lot of ways, it feels like what would you have gotten if you had gone home a actual horror game instead of just actually being a game that feels like a horror game. There's actual animation. I don't recall. Game called Deathbound though. So once again, I want to see if I get a general idea of what the game looks like. So it, to me, looks like a kind of Dark Souls, like action RPG type game. And yeah, it doesn't look bad. Project Z Beyond Order launches in the spring of 2025. It's a cooperative zombie first-person shooter. Horror games being expected to be released in the October month to now we're getting horror games being announced in the October month. And this is such a pixely game that the idea of it being a horror game feels weird. And potentially this is the kind of game that I just don't know I really would want to play, because my concern is that while some of this imagery might be interesting to look at, the majority of your time is going to be the point. That's kind of the point of horror games. Still probably a better experience though than just like watching Smile as a movie. It would be, I guess, an interesting large amount of time you'd have to commit to have somebody watch several of the new horror movies that have come out in October and compare them to horror games that came out in the same year, which would be about the easiest comparison you could make, and try and figure out whether games are better at horror than movies are. And generally, I imagine movies might have more polish, but games have more interactivity to draw a player in, so this hard to describe feeling of horror is probably higher when you play a horror game. Games are much more accepted in the gaming community, if there really is a gaming community, than horror movies are accepted amongst the movie community, if there's really a movie viewing community. So progress has been made a little bit in that case. A roguelike deck builder called Deck of Haunts is going to be published by Dingen Entertainment for consoles and PC. It's due out in early 2025. Again, we assume this is a horror game, but very different experience. One of the things though, how this game actually plays is kind of intriguing. I'd like to see more about it later on. The Thing Remastered had gameplay trailer. We had already sat through that, so you're getting even a little nostalgia. Honestly though, I'm not sure how many old games are left that people are going to be nostalgic for. Bolercho has released the Friends of Jimbo Pack 2 update, now available. It is a collaboration with Cyberpunk 2077, Binding of Isaac, Slay the Spire, and Stardew Valley. Which, you know, this is Isaac, so there's their Binding of Isaac comparison. Cyberpunk 2077, it's painting a very poor picture for people who don't want to play horror games but do want to play something new. That being said, I wouldn't be surprised if there isn't still plenty of slightly older games to play instead that are not horror based. course, following the news stories today, you would assume that there are only horror games coming out or visual novels. And sometimes there are horror visual novels, but yeah. The Famitsu sales for the (14th to the 20th) have been updated on Gematsu. So every single story that opened today was a story that's new. It seems, and there just was a lot of them for this catch up on Friday. That I just assumed Gematsu was catching up on some older news. So the new information shows Super Mario Jamboree taking back the first spot from the Nintendo Switch, whereas seemed like either the non-updated news or last week's news had PS5 in several of the top 5 spots, and still PS5 is selling particularly well. Professional Baseball Series X Digital Edition being new has sold quite a lot, outsold by 1,200 units this week, the PlayStation 5 Digital Edition. Yeah, we have been seeing that priced right, Xbox does occasionally do fairly well compared to what they've done in the past. That being said, they're still really not doing anywhere as good as the Switch is doing, and there is always the suspicion that the vast majority of Xboxes bought in Japan are being bought by military from the US or foreigners in general, and that actual Japanese M-Tune, Belletro, and Potioncraft. So you've got two different games collaborating with different people, which these are, I guess, the dumb fun type games where it makes a lot of sense to do that. It makes a lot less sense to have a Call of Duty collaboration with Dave the Diver or something crazy like that. Now, as far as the gaming on Linux part of my macro, I'm not sure. I am not gonna just have to follow every single link on the first page and only open up links that I haven't opened up before, because they randomize in the order. That that's the only real way to make sure all the news stories, a different title. The success of Fallout London really can only lead to one of two things. Either you get hired by Bethesda and then absorbed by Bethesda and never do anything good again with your creativity, or you go and make your own company. They have a team called Team Fallout London, or FFOLON, but the success here now really pushes them to become a real business, a real development company, and make a new game inspired by this mod on a different engine, probably. You can get your own UFO in the latest No Man's Sky update during a really weird expedition. Would be a thing. Let's see. Proton Experimental gets a big change for video playback in games for the Steam Deck and Linux. This new update in Proton handles video playback. It fixes or improves video for Galgun 2, which is a unique game to name specifically. Soul Calibur 6, Call of Cthulhu, Greedfall, Onimusha, Warlords, Bloodstained Ritual of the Night, Indigo Park, Chapter 1, Agony, Unrated. Oh, yeah, Agony was also a weird one to mention because that's also an adult game. There's kind of a focus here. Galgun is very much a lewd game. Agony pushes it to a fairly Steam Deck. It seems like it's still a little too complicated and not efficient. There's even a Steam dock for about $200 that has a built-in video capture card. So you dock your Steam Deck to the dock and then you have a whole separate piece of hardware that would capture the video out through the USB-C before then passing it through HDMI, I imagine, to a TV. I could also play, I've recognized that I can play Memento Mori on PC through was a storefront launcher called DMM, but yeah, I still don't see a way I could actually play it. I'd be so distracted playing it while doing these streams. I think I'm in a much better position. 6.19, same as the latest beta release, so because I'm still on the beta, although I'm not sure I really need to be on the beta anymore. Improved performance across lots of games, improved reliability around micro SD cards. No reason why you wouldn't update it at all. Bluetooth improvements. I'm not sure what Mura is as far as Mura compensation. A Linux kernel update, which also then allows for the desktop mode KDE Plasma 5.27.10 to be updated. Support for some HDMI CEC features in the docking station, and more, much more. So it's a long list compared to the Nintendo Switch, which does a lot less. And that's really what we want. Here is we want Steam Deck to be much smoother of a console-like experience, despite also having all the ability to mod things in the desktop mode. And there's just no reason to not update, even if you are just on the stable version. What doesn't happen now, and that this is the question, is whether the next focus is for a 4.0 version of SteamOS that would come out and support PCs in general, or at least more devices other than just maybe supporting ARC, instead of running into the problem of buying something that might be a fake micro SD card on Amazon, or might work and not actually be fake, but might just have incredibly poor performance. And so yeah, there is something that even fairly good SSD cards, there's a certain command that isn't always enabled that they're also working on that significantly improves performance. Some of the benchmarks that I've seen on the official Raspberry Pi micro SD is much faster, and much faster is what you need on the Raspberry Pi 5 to get it over the hump of being up. But also we've run into this problem where unless they get really powerful and you really can use it as your daily driver PC, Raspberry Pis have run out of things that they can actually do. RetroPie has not put an update out in a very long time, because there's kind of nothing more it can do. It can't simulate all Nintendo 64 games or emulate all Nintendo 64 games perfectly, and without major hardware improvements it just never will, and that's mostly GPU improvements that would have to happen. It's not going to move into the realm of doing PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3 emulation unless it's just majorly powerful, and it just nobody's thinking of any other pulling AdGuard home onto the router after modding it with the Asus Merlin. Firmware, because then it will be directly on your router, and the router will have more processing power anyways versus a Raspberry Pi. And AdGuard Home in general just has better features, I think, than a Pi-hole does. Yeah, I don't know of too many other projects. One thing I have been thinking about gadgets is it is kind of crazy that surround sound amps, surround sound receivers, mostly come with a self-calibrating microphone that you plug into the front, but they don't use that microphone as a smart Alexa-like device in every bedroom. But ideally, if you're going to be opulent about it, a TV in every room. A surround sound in every room was a goal that I personally would have had when I was younger. And realistically, now it's not recommended. You should probably not have TVs in bedrooms or surround sounds in rooms, but practically, it's still very nice for people to be able to have the best visual and audio experience when they are watching something. But yeah, also you would like smart speakers, smart microphones, if needed, if those devices are useful at all. In reality, it may be the case that the Alexa-like devices are actually all useless, and mostly I think that's probably. It is a crowdfunding on a Kickstarter. Does seem to have a Steam link. It is very crazy just how late to the party a gravity inspired, Mario Galaxy inspired game is. Like, I know a lot of people didn't really love Mario Galaxy that much, but it had some interesting ideas. Although the 3D gravity elements, I think, were hard to program for. I don't think there's a generic Unreal Engine or Unity engine that's, even to this day, programmed in such a way to focus on the 3D gravity implemented. So yet another mobile games. Some of these hardware manufacturers do this fairly frequently. in most cases, most people thought even the ROG Ally X was premature to be released so close to the ROG Ally. It is, I think, just in general a different mentality. There's not going to be anything in this trailer at all, is there? Of putting out devices and seeing if they sell, and then putting out a newer version of the devices. The pristine cut. Although it is kind of a weird factor again that they put out a new cut of the game when the original version of Slay the Princess was not that old. Although I think in this case they just updated the old game, and that is one of the beauties of Steam in general, is that you do have that ability to just fix your older games and release a new version. And it's more difficult on Steam. And Abyssal Terror's DLC is out now. Torchlight 2 has local co-op too, and I I kind of said, well, that's not something you really see these days, and I guess I'm proven wrong, at least by Potato. Local co-op does make a lot of sense to have a resurgence, but it's really hard, I think, to convince developers to add local co-op to games. But certainly it would save companies some money if they had local co-op instead of running servers. But the question is, does local co-op hurt the speed of some games terribly? Or does it really just hurt the cost of development servers at the moment? And I'm fairly happy with that, because any information that might be leaked is significant did I turn on a light bulb or not type information. So yeah, if China is looking at my account on Tuya, I kind of don't care. Worst thing they could do is flicker a bunch of lights and run up an electricity bill. That being said, I guess they could get into cameras and create some kind of voyeurism situation if it were insecure. And that is, I guess, a slight concern, but not really. Not for the convenience of all that. But local is better. And if thread and matter happening around the textures of these characters, which the fact that they're working on the textures of these characters does imply you will be playing as characters that look something like this in the final version. There was a thought, certainly, that what you're seeing in Deadlock might be 100% placeholder images, and that the final game could be completely different visually. Doesn't seem like that's going to be the case. If anything, it feels like it's just going to fall into more of a cartoony Counter-Strike type, more cartoony type game. Maybe Counter-Strike is the wrong comparison. Team Fortress 2? No. I don't know what. We're really at a point where I think I could get rid of Video Games Chronicles and just follow gaming on Linux. There's not 100% overlap there. Sonic X Shadow Generations has been released and Steam Deck verified. From what I understand, this game is revisiting some of the Shadow stories and building on nostalgia for old Sonic levels and old Sonic games. It's overwhelmingly positive. It's the most positive game, I believe, since Sonic Mania, which also heavily relied on nostalgia. It did seem like people liked that somewhat new Sonic game that did make new content, but the vast majority of Sulfur.com, again, I don't think my macro opened up any of these stories. I think I had to do them all myself. Bungie's creative leadership team is integrated into PlayStation Studios as a live service support studio. We had already heard this, but it's still pretty bad news. NC staff was laid off in a restructuring meant to decentralize its subsidiaries. To avoid becoming a company that constantly posts losses, NCSoft is converting its subsidiaries into independent studios and their own culture and philosophies. So inherently, they're making it a mission there in that kind of restructuring that they are never planning on being profitable. Thunder Horse closes after more than a decade. This California studio created games like the Samurai Blitz and Flynn, Son of Crimson. I don't recognize either of those games. And if you've been around for more than a decade and you're naming two games I don't recognize, then you've had limited success at best and clearly didn't end on success. SAG-AFTRA has returned to the negotiating table with major gaming studios. The strike went on for a fairly long amount of time with very little reporting on it, although in fairness, if nothing's happening, if they haven't returned to the negotiating table and they just are striking for a month straight, it's kind of hard to have any new information. Arguably, I would say mainstream video humane protections for actors against AI exploitation is not an unreasonable ask, and the success of these contracts shows that most companies agree. That was definitely the main point that they wanted to argue right now. and make before it starts getting overused. Although, weirdly, even a couple months ago, the bandwagoning around AI voices was much stronger and at least being supported much more vocally by video game companies than it is these days. I think they learned fairly quickly that that was not a positive thing for them to embrace so vocally, as far as we're going to save money by replacing all the voice actors with AI. There's real danger and need for unionization in mocap people in particular, because these are effectively stunt in a lot of cases. You're being given fake weapons to swing around, you're being asked to do rolls and jumps, things that you may not have known you were going to be asked to do that day, things you may not really know how to do properly. Real physical danger of injury exists, on top of just exertion and just not knowing what your job description is from day to day, which is not fair. If you were working at McDonald's, just to use a comparison, and you were hired to be at the checkout counter, and you're just supposed to be pushing buttons and sorry about that. Getting a phone call to confirm that I had a hard out when I already knew I had a hard out. Yeah, to not belabor it, it's just not fair to be hired to do one job, like run a cash register, and then be told to go be a janitor, that you didn't agree to work that job in general. You weren't expecting to work that job, and the being a cash register, all this IDE and use it or even look at it, and then later on decide you want to sell your project. It seems like you can't, or you would have to pay some kind of license. And there's a lot of times where software is released for free personally. Use just to be a booby trap, so that you have to pay a license, a very expensive license later on, or JetBrains could even sue people. And if it is not at a very high level of freedom that you can do anything with it as far as the software, you shouldn't even look at it. You should just use something different. And yeah, JetBrains does not seem to be making Ryder that high level of freedom. There's reality. Also, I don't think I have a story here, but I think it's Satya Nadella is the CEO of Microsoft at this point. Whoever is the CEO of Microsoft. Just got a major bonus payout despite I think it's over 2,500 layoffs being made in Microsoft, and that's probably just in the Xbox divisions that there's been over 2,500 layoffs. But I mean, that's the corruption and evilness of corporations in capitalist societies in general, is that investors love to reward CEOs who save money by laying just people in the world and everybody else being nowhere as rich as they are. Moving on, indie boxing game Undisputed. Sold 1 million units in a week. After playing Punch Club, though, I'm not sure I really could enjoy playing a real boxing game. Punch Club was a boxing management game, so the actual boxing was automated, but yeah, I'm not sure I actually would enjoy a real boxing game. Beyond Good and Evil 2, which will probably never get made or get released. Inherently, there is a question about how much work, if any, really has been put into Beyond Good and Evil 2 versus just a few concept arts that are very nicely polished. And Ubisoft may very well have put such a small amount of money on it that it is never going to have enough to start happening. And there definitely was a previous creative director, at least one, So this effectively is a first-person shooter, and then the hurdles along the way. So I guess this is a fairly long interview. The next Ken Levine game I think it's called Calypso. We haven't heard anything about that in a while, but it is very possible it'll just come out when it's ready to come out. But it's been a while, certainly, since Bioshock Infinite has come, and I'm not sure that it'll be anywhere as embraced, this new Calypso game, not having on Steam. One of the things is that my macro is not properly curating the pages that are opened from some of the other news sources, but I honestly don't think they need to curate those pages. And also, it would probably just save me time to not run the curate functions. I only need to really curate to look for tags that have like nudity, sexual content, things like that. If the first 5 tags have those, then those are not going to be YouTube friendly, and so I have to censor myself and close those tabs. But that's only when I'm looking, because I imagine people just know that it wouldn't get reported on. Interesting. Hot Springs Onsen is the name, and it seems like it's a decoration game. And then you've got a character creator, which I can't imagine that they really do anything with the character creator. It seems like you're just putting outfits on who may just this character that may just be a Hot Springs attendant. I don't think you're going to see them actually in the Hot Springs. Otherwise, this game would have a lot of nudity in it. Yeah, I just don't think there's an actual game here that's worth playing. It's just a hyper specific. Wouldn't be surprised if just immediately get a warning saying you can't have those words in your titles or thumbnails, or immediately get a strike even. Yeah, I'm gonna say this looks too asset flippy. Yeah, this doesn't look good enough. Give this a chance. It's been a long time since I've seen a surfing game, so I'm willing to give that a chance, even though it doesn't look a game. Usually from a larger company, something more. Here's another one that didn't get curated. Yeah, it's usually a bigger game, better known, and they get stopped for some reason. And they get blocked by one random employee who doesn't seem like they're following the same rules that everybody else is. Here we have a whole Barbie game. That is shocking. Like, Barbie should be way more popular, and maybe Barbie has more direct lines of advertisement to kids. Maybe there's a bunch of Barbie game advertisements that show up on like Nick Jr. Nicktoons. But as far as your mainstream video game journalists, they don't even talk about these games, either when they're released on console or when they're released on Steam, which is probably later. For all I know, this game here may be several years old. Now, I also will admit I don't think that the quality of Barbie around athletic people showing off their ability to move around and flex and dance in a unique style and show off their body. So inherently it wouldn't be crazy to have ballet be done almost in the nude or fully in the nude to show off muscles and stretching. Of course, that wouldn't be proper, so then they put them in leotards, tight-fitting clothes that mostly are just as descriptive visually as being in the nude. And in other forms of art, that is accepted without question a little bit more when you have bodybuilders putting all kinds of body butter on themselves to show off muscles and wearing as small of leotard, banana hammock type clothes as possible. Of course, is fairly weird looking from the outside, but people engaged in bodybuilding ask it no questions. I'm not sure if this Miraculous series ever was super popular. This French animated cartoon. Now we're seeing some real nostalgic things. It's weird to have one Barbie game appear. It's weird to have a Barbie game and a Miraculous game. Yep. And that probably is slightly different generations, although it all blends together for younger generations. If younger generations even know any of those characters, which is questionable. I'm not sure that the youngest of generations are just not watching Disney Plus things and whatever is being shown on Disney Plus seems to be possibly the only thing there. The only thing that kids would know about is what I was trying to say. Let's continue our hurry up. Go shoot there's a whole series in which you take photos of ghosts that's like that game is parroting or being similar to, although concept of having to take photos of ghosts is not the worst. I'm gonna say, well, no, this is kind of a weird visual novel in that it's almost photorealistic photos. It looks like it is photos of probably some kind of Korean boy band in a visual novel setting. It's an interesting twist on it. Now, note that while there was a whole bunch of stories and announcements for horror games, what we're actually seeing on Steam is still a lot of the same old, just random games that don't have any presence. They don't put out press releases. They're not really trying to do anything. So how do you get from the prologue to the actual game? though. This is, I think, something that Steam has been trying to crack down as you come out with prologue, and then previously there would be links, easier ways to find the actual game, which here's the actual game. And in most cases, I have no interest in spending the extra energy to find the actual games, and I'll just close the tab anyways. And that's, I think, very much in line with what most people do. The whole prologue concept I don't think is particularly that good. Yeah, definitely was a case that Steam and Valve was pushing prologues. I don't know why. Man, I'm gonna have to probably end early today. Yeah, let's see how many more games there are. Okay, there's just a small amount. Let's see if we can go through these fairly quickly. And yeah, a lot of random horror games that didn't have it. Well, I'm not going to make it. I'll look at the last 4 games off screen. That's going to be it for this stream. Thanks for watching.